everybody and welcome to the Flute Practice. Today we are going to be covering quite a controversial topic, the age-old should I use the Rockstro hold or not? Now most of you are like, what does that even mean? And you're not wrong to ask that question. I will just quick disclaimer, I am not the biggest expert on the Rockstro hold, and I am also not the biggest expert on any hold in particular or any school of anything. I have done a little bit of research which I'm going to present to you guys, and we're going to chat about this a little bit, but I want you guys to just please bear that in mind before you crucify me in the comments below. I also just want to say that if I am getting any of this information wrong, I deeply apologize. I am very educationable, teachable, learnable. I don't know what the real word is, but you can tell me better in the comments below. We can discuss and debate this till the cows come home. Hopefully, I'm going to present a kind of a midway point by the end of this. So let's dive in. Okay, a little bit of background here. So we have got Boehm, who is our kind of founder dude, made the modern flute around 1850. The flute that we know. Before that, we were playing slightly less advanced kind of wooden flute with varying amounts of keys. Then comes this new flute model, and somewhere in the mix, this guy Rockstro, who writes this treatise 1890 and says a whole bunch of stuff that has kind of lasted through the century into our time. Now, interestingly enough, when I was doing research on this, I always thought kind of Rockstro introduced this groundbreaking new technique, and everyone was like, whoa, what is he doing? But actually, from the research that I was looking at, it's actually the other way around. When the Boehm flute came along, the playing or the position of the hands and so on actually changed. And Rockstro was actually kind of positioning himself, or kind of what would the word be, arguing for the former holding position of the flute rather than this new technique that was infiltrating the flute world. So it's not that he really introduced something new, rather than that he was arguing for what already was. Okay, so before we get into the Rockstro position, let us just look at the other side of that, which is the normal flute position, as if such a thing exists. But let's just get into what you will often see in many flute kind of textbooks. Most textbooks will teach you to start off with to align your flute so that your tone hole is aligned with the keys of your flute. That is the first point. Then they will teach you to kind of hold the flute just above the knuckle or somewhere over here. Once again, it varies. And that the thumb, and this is really one of the big differences, goes underneath the flute, underneath the kind of pipe of the flute, holding up the flute with the baby finger, creating kind of the counterweight, holding it down in varying forms of some kind. Once again, there's so much variation in this. I'm not going to say this is the way to hold the flute, but I'm just kind of giving what textbooks show and teach very often. So Rockstro has a very different kind of approach to this, and that is rather to think not so much of the flute being held up or being gripped or held, but rather it kind of creating this lever system where the flute is rather being kind of wedged with one force here, this force pushing against the face, and then this force pushing the flute this way. So his system, basically one of the big changes, I'm going to turn away to see this, the thumb sits more back behind the flute rather than underneath the flute. So it's back behind, pushing in this direction, whereas this hand is pushing the flute in that direction. So you have these two opposing forces which create a kind of balance. And you can see I don't really need to hold anything up at all. And I think there's a lot of truth in this. You can hold your flute on the bars gently like that, and you will see that in fact the flute doesn't need to be held up as much as it needs to be balanced up. Now, one of the big kind of distinctions between the Rockstro hold and between the normal hold is the positioning of the head joint. And I'm going to be doing a whole video on just this because I would like to get into this topic a little bit more. I'm going to briefly touch on this here. So basically the Rockstro hold, it's an idea of really kind of holding the flute stably in place there between these 3 points. I think in this treatise he actually writes that no part of the body that is used for playing or for compressing the keys should be used for stabilizing and holding up the instrument, which would include the baby finger. So the baby finger, in his idea, is that the baby finger should not in any way be or have a supporting function. Now, the idea is that the flute is kind of heavier on this side where these bars are, and as a result needs to be over a little bit more to that side, or at least have the keys pointing straight up to the ceiling. And Rockstro argues that in order to do this with the thumb back like that, you need to, and this is really important, turn the head joint inwards more. He asserts that it's not so much that you're turning the head joint in, but rather that you're turning the body of the flute out. So in other words, the position of the flute should stay the same, and that you're turning the whole body outwards in order to correct that balance, so that you can get this kind of wedging thing going on a little bit more. It should be added that I haven't seen, and once again, I am no expert on this, but I haven't seen any mention of kind of excessive force or excessive tension. There's no kind of mention of pressing really hard, although I have heard from various teachers that do teach this system that you need to press really hard here and really firmly against the lip in order to kind of achieve this. Once again, from other things I've read, there seems to be disagreement within the Rockstro movement about this too. So I'm going to just go back to his original writings on this. There seems to be a definite emphasis on the stability between these 3 points, these kind of triangle points, but not an excessive force. And the idea is still to keep the fingers free and moving, though these points are very, very, very stable. Okay, so you kind of get the basic idea. There is a kind of a sound that comes along with the Rockstro. I think possibly the low register, so I'm going to try and get this position going. As I said, I was not trained in the Rockstro hold, so I am probably the worst ambassador of this right now. But I think, or I feel like, and we're going to move it back just so we can get the controversy, so we can get the contrast. I definitely feel like my low register is much easier with the Rockstro. Okay guys, what I really, 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 really want to encourage you at this point in the game is to try both of these things out. I want you to try this Rockstro, so turning in, or not turning in that head joint, but turning out that body ever so slightly so that you can really position that thumb at the back behind the pipe rather than underneath. So try it out and feel how it feels. Now, and this is kind of where I'm going to kind of make a full circle, and I wouldn't call it a value judgment, although it probably is because I'm a human being and that's what we do. But really, I want us to think about the fact that we are all so incredibly different. Some of us have got longer fingers, shorter fingers, bigger lips, smaller lips, longer chins, shorter chins, longer arms. I mean, you name it, we are all such beautifully unique beings. And I don't think there's any single system that is going to work for everybody. In addition to that, we all love and like different things, and I think there are advantages and disadvantages of both these systems, and I'm going to go through some of them, and I've mentioned, of course, some. There's a very different kind of a sound, I think, that does come, yes. There might be certain freedoms that you will experience differently from what I'm mentioning as well. Maybe for some of you, you're like, wow, this is it. This is what I've been missing my whole life. For some of you, you might not. You might be like, woo, I can't do that. So I'm not telling you what to do here, just to be very clear. I'm just going to present some of the possible difficulties. Personally, and here goes, I think that the truth or the answer lies somewhere in between. I love the idea of this balance, kind of between the hands rather than holding up the flute. I completely and absolutely agree with Rockstro on this. I think it's very, very, not detrimental, but I think the idea that we're holding up the flute often comes with more tension and kind of force than it needs, rather than just thinking about balancing the flute in the hands. That being said, and I've experimented with all sorts of thumb positions and all sorts of things, I find that having my thumb at the back behind the flute creates more tension in my fingers. I find it sort of straightens out the fingers slightly and creates kind of a tension in the upper arm for me, once again, for me. And I find having the finger underneath the flute is also sometimes lacks the stability. So I do feel like the flute kind of moves around a lot more, especially sort of between C and D. I find this very tricky. So for me, I kind of somewhere in between. I'm a little bit behind the flute. I'm a little bit behind so I can still feel this movement, but I'm also not completely behind, and I kind of have the thumb in the most natural position that I can find for my thumb so that my fingers can move the most freely. I can't say this is any particular school. It's for me just, I don't know, dare I say common sense? So I think play around with that thumb position and feel what feels good and feel what really works. I definitely, personally, I'm very wary about excessive force here, just because, this is a delicate part of your body, and I think for some people this might really work. Some people have played like that their whole life and there's no problem. For some people they get pain, and they can get quite serious medical conditions. So I personally am going to really encourage not to do this unless, I don't know if there is an unless. One of the big things I'd say that I do feel is important is not to completely exclude the baby finger. I do think it's a valuable supporting asset, and I don't think that we should totally discredit it. In my kind of, once again, experience and feeling of this, I think the more points we have of balance on the flute, the kind of less pressure there is on all the other parts. And so I like to kind of think of a constant dynamic kind of shift of balance in the hand, that kind of we are training, just like we're training finger combinations, we're training this gentle shift in balance and allowing that to be a part of the practicing process rather than being completely stuck and fixed. This is my approach. So I can't say yay or nay, this works for me. It might work for you, it might not. Perhaps what I can say is that they're just very specific sounds, and they're just very specific different kinds of sounds. And if you don't like the Rockstro sound, then I think you don't want to play like that. It's kind of that simple. Whereas if you do like the sound, and if you enjoy the sound and you're like, wow, that's the kind of playing that I love, or that's how I want to play, great. Also, just a little mention here, very famous Rockstro players, people like James Galway, Susan Milan, Raphael Trevisani, who was one of Galway's students, Geoffrey Gilbert, who was all of their teachers, William Bennett. I mean, most of the English players do play Rockstro, and I know a lot of the American players also play Rockstro. So you are in good company if you do play Rockstro. I'm not in any way, once again, bashing the Rockstro hold at all. I think, when we're deciding how we want to play and what we want to do and the sound we want to use, instead of fighting each other on these topics like we so often do, we should maybe listen a little bit more, and we should maybe try and just gain from other people what is useful and what is important. I personally am so grateful for having masterclasses with people like Susan Milan and Raphael Trevisani, and I unfortunately had an injury when Galway did come to Cape Town, and I couldn't play in his classes, but watching a lot of his classes, I'm very, very, very grateful, even when I don't fully and absolutely agree with all the things that Rockstro puts forward. I'm so grateful because I feel like I learn and I get so many more perspectives, and it really helps kind of shed light when things in your own technique are not working properly, and then you're like, oh wow, okay, that isn't working. What can I do to change and fix this? So that is the perspective I want all of us to go into on this, in this debate. You are welcome to go ahead and tear me apart in the comments below. I can handle it. I'm a big girl. But I really want to encourage healthy and active debate down there. So get going. Have fun with it, guys. Happy practicing, happy exploring, and see you next time.